Hello and welcome. The goal of this podcast is to get listeners connected with others in the sports industry because they say it's all about who you know, and now you know us. Hey, everybody, this is your host, Connor Shank, and you're joining us today on the Constant Sports Podcast. We're joined today by my co host, Callan Coleman, alongside Sydney Crassa. How's it going, guys?
Hi.
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Perfect. So, thanks for, like I said, thanks for joining us today. We got a great guest in Sydney. Sydney's well versed in the sports industry, sports management space, especially the NIL space. She's also spent time at the George Washington program, undergraduate and graduate. She's as well as a gymnast there, so she's on both sides of the coin. She's got a lot of industry related experience, and we're really excited to kind of get her thoughts on where specifically kind of the sports athlete relations, NIL industry, kind of where that's headed going forward. So just to start, I guess, Sydney, can you give the listeners and viewers here maybe a quick elevator pitch of kind of how and why you got to where you're at right now with Raymond?
Yeah, so taking it all the way back, definitely a fan of all sports, whether that was watching or playing growing up. Very competitive environment in my family, and with cousins and everything. Always parents played sports in college as well. So, that kind of instilled just that love for competition. And then I always knew I wanted to be in the agency space. Not to say I knew how to get to that point, but it was a job that I wanted. I watched Jerry Maguire, was very inspired by that. And, I went to George Washington University with my gymnastics and, kind of knew that there was a really good master's program, a lot of good connections, and, met really meaningful people to me still to this day that were in the agency space and kind of gave me a guideline. Did my master's and then was given the opportunity to work at a sports agency simultaneously actually doing my master's. So, just kind of right place, right time for me, especially with the NIL world, being a college athlete. And then, fasting forward to where we are today. I mean, like you said, I've gotten kind of both ends of the spectrum of being an athlete and now being on the Raymond rep team.
Right. And was it, you kind of mentioned the Jerry Maguire movie was kind of a catalyst, you could say, in there, but what do you think your time as a college athlete, you had some experiences on the NCAA kind of committee as like a public relations executive. Was that something where you were like, okay, I like kind of the NCAA as the public executive, role, and then you're like, but I'm not interested in going down that career. I still like the agency stuff. Was that something that you had to balance?
Yeah, I definitely I feel like since high school, it was like always agency. Like I wanted to, be on the side for the clients and like work with, professional teams at that point. NIL and working with brands was never really on my radar.
Right.
And then, stepping into a place where, it was the perfect storm of everything that I had just been through with college athletics into, I'm a sport, like gymnastics is a sport where, you don't have a professional league. So you can, to make an extra little bit of money in college would have been something really nice for me. And I know for a lot of other athletes as well. So, it was honest, like I said, the perfect storm, and I couldn't have dreamt it any other way.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, kind of getting the NIL rules changed while you were in the middle of college, obviously, probably kind of completely changed the path that you wanted to go. But you mentioned you always wanted to do the agency side of things. And now, obviously, with Raymond, you're doing a lot of NIL kind of marketing and branding deals. Do you kind of think you always wanted to be on that marketing side of the agency industry, or like do you eventually want to move over to kind of a player contract side, or are you just kind of keeping it wide open and taking all the experience you can get?
Yeah, I think wide open is definitely, the name of the game. Like you always want to be adaptable and be someone that can do it all. But I also think that, my negotiation skills have been completely transformed by doing the brand deals and by, creating different opportunities for different athletes with their vision that, for a player contract, that would be, honing in on the skills that I've already developed through the brand deals that I've already managed and fought for. The other thing too is that I think it was never a thought to do the branding marketing side, but
Yep.
as our age, we know social media, we know how to do, just like we know how to brand as a gymnast, I knew how to brand myself. I knew how to be professional on camera. And so I think it translated well when, this all came about.
Yeah, for sure. It's a good kind of, I guess, intersection of your career and also where the industry is heading. And then as you were competing as a college athlete there, was it the sports management program? Did you always know you were going to, check that box, I guess, to say is like, okay, I want to get my sports management degree, and then I guess hit the real world? Or what was it about that specific program, I guess?
Yeah, so it was definitely always on my radar to do a master's in sport management. I had, going through my college career, like I knew 4 years was going to be at GW. I was going to be doing
Mhm.
gymnastics. Pre-COVID, I actually had gotten hurt and I had used 1 year of just a medical hardship. So I knew that that could be kind of a segue into my master's and, keep competing, keep like my scholarship. That was another
Yep.
thing. And, just easily translate. And then the GW sports management program was just such a strong, the school of business is very reputable. There were a lot of women in like professors that are just
Mhm.
absolute powerhouses in the space. So it really, like, I've gotten really lucky with, where I've been, when I've been, and, time's everything. So.
Yep, it's all about the timing. So yeah, it's huge. And then Callan and I, and obviously the viewers, were interested in kind of, so after you graduated and got your master's, so where in there did you join the Hawker Sports and Entertainment kind of side of the agency? Because as some of the viewers and the guests here are familiar with Tay Hawker and kind of his NIL agency he formed up, and we had him previous on the podcast, and he kind of took a little bit of a different approach where a lot of when NIL first came out, right, it was like football, men's basketball, but like he kind of took and went down the gymnastics, the women's soccer, and kind of more diversified his clientele. I feel like that's a fair assessment. And so, where did you kind of pick up on Hawker, sports entertainment, and just kind of tell us about that?
Yeah. So, okay. So I'll give you a brief timeline. I did school from 2016 to 2020 undergrad.
Mhm.
2021 was that master's year. And that was also like a COVID year. And that's when I
Right.
started. And then July of 21 was when NIL started. So I would say May of 21, Tay and I had met each other and, he knew I wanted to be an agent and
Mhm.
he kind of kept that in the back of his mind, just me making a connection with someone in the sports industry. And then I had gotten a call probably, I would say January of 21. And he was like, this is what I'm thinking about doing. I know you want to be an agent. Would you take the opportunity? And at the time, I'm going into my like second semester of my first year of master's. And I'm
Right.
like, yes, like
Really?
there's nothing to lose at this point. NIL, it's happening. We don't know when, we don't know what it's
Exactly.
going to look like. But at that point, I had nothing to lose. And so, and that's the truth. I had everything to gain in that point because when May of 21, when we launched Hawker as just, privately, we were all talking about what it was going to look like when it launched.
Mhm.
It gave July 21, we had our clients first signed. Like we were on calls, pitching athletes. And at the time, I could have went a different route into a bigger agency and been an intern. Whereas, I was doing the hands-on right
Yep.
away, right when it started, just like everybody else. Everyone had the same, starting point. So
Yeah, that's big to be able to kind of get that hands-on experience. Because I mean, not to get into me, but I've worked at some bigger agencies in the past, and you're right, it's definitely not as hands-on as you want it to be, as opposed to smaller agencies. But if you kind of recall, and we'll jump into kind of the transition over to Raymond in a second, but when you were with Tay and Hawker, kind of what were some of the coolest things you got to work on? Was there a specific project that kind of stuck out, a specific memory that you always have that you think kind of not only was enjoyable, but kind of taught you a lot and carried you forward in your career?
totally. So, I mean, like Tay and I worked like this. Like we built up that agency to what it was. And it was so special. That'll always be special to me. Like we, you know, anyone that we like when we first started, we were like, let's sign anyone, like let's see if they're marketable, right? Like if we kind of like them, like we're like, sign with us. That's kind of how every agency was, right? But just those initial, that first year of like, when an athlete's like, yeah, I really want to work with you, and it's like, okay, I'm doing, like, we're ready to start something here.
Yep.
Those are always so special to me. But the actual project that I would say kind of like opened my eyes to be more creative was with, specifically, it was Tori Hansen, and it was an underrating MLS team, and they had an ambassadorship. So the two of them, I managed that partnership, and she got to, take tours of the facility, meet the staff, and like sell tickets to the games, and in a like authentic way. Like she brought her team there, and there were watch parties and things like that. So that partnership was full speed ahead 100% of the way as soon as we got it done. So being on that project was very special to me because it made me think outside the box. Say there's bigger, there's more for these college athletes. So
Definitely. And then as you were there, I guess from that time now, recently you kind of moved over to the Raymond representation. And for the listeners and viewers who are kind of in the NIL/marketing, influencer marketing space, it's a very hot name, hot brand, hot agency as of now. So that's one of the reasons why we're excited to talk here, especially about kind of Raymond and some of the things you guys got going over there. So what was that like? Did you send an email? Did they have a job application? Kind of walk the listeners and viewers through kind of maybe like the application process and what that was like.
Yeah, so I would say building such a strong foundation at Hawker and my division of clients. Like once I realized I wanted to focus on female, I mean, I was working with all different sports, all different genders, which I don't mind, but that female, like, strong group of clients, I built a name for not only for Hawker and the agency, but also, myself and my resume. So,
Right.
When, I don't know if you did you know Tay got acquired by Halo Sports?
Mhm.
Okay, yeah. So when Tay got acquired by Halo Sports, it kind of left me in the position of, I have my clients, I have this amazing brand, I have this, agency that could do a lot, but, I don't want to be, I'm not there yet. I'm not ready to do that yet. I want it to be somewhere where, there's a structure in place.
Yep.
There's a team of really strong people who are very like me. I'm not going to say they're exactly like me. Like they're just, able to get the job done. They have really strong clients as well. And so it was honestly a perfect fit for me to give Mike a call and say, we both had probably the strongest gymnastics divisions in our in college space. And so, it was, should we be competitors or, join together and I can, bring that value of some of my top clients over. And so that's exactly what happened. Called him up, I didn't do any application process, which kind of probably upsets a lot of people, but like they say in the sports industry, it's about who you know, and you can't be afraid to pick up the phone, and if you have good intentions, like, you will see that through in your conversations. So
Absolutely. Yeah. Our tagline of the podcast is "It's all about who you know," and there you go. There's a perfect example. So let's dive into that a little bit. Kind of tell us a little bit about being an NIL manager, kind of some of the skills and tactics that you think it takes, and then maybe go in a little bit more in depth on kind of different things that you do and use to kind of source brand deals for specific clients.
Yeah. So it's like, what do you not do is really the
Right.
It's not for everyone. I will say that there's a lot of people who want to not only like be in the, that's about any job, right? Like you say you want to do something, but when the going gets tough and like you're on your phone all the time and you're like working constantly, like there's no off hours, it's not for everyone, and that is okay. And so for me, like, being responsive, being professional, like that's kind of how I've always been programmed. And so it does come naturally. Like I'm constantly on my emails, always staying up to date with trends for my athletes, right? Like they need to be on the forefront of things. And so, like just being super, I guess, adaptable and like current, and you're just taking in a lot of information, but also like what can you do with that? And then that's what transpires normally into the deals, right? So the athlete comes to you and says, I really like this and I really like this, and you're like, okay, well, how can we make it work? And how can we monetize it? Because that's, at the end of the day, that's really good for the athletes, and
Right.
it's a good, paycheck and a way to manage money and things like that. So, as a manager, you need to look at things holistically too, like, what's best for their brand long term. Is it a one-off deal? Is it a long-term partnership? Is it something they truly believe in? Because that's all going to come to fruition at some point. You can see right through that. I'm sure daily with you guys. I'm sure you've seen that as well.
Yep.
And then how to actually get the deals, I would say like inbound and outbound is so important. So your inbound is your relationships with different marketplaces, agencies that only work with brands. You have to have those relationships. And then the outbound, which is, outreach and, just being able to put yourself out there for your athletes. So kind of works both ways.
Yeah. No, and then I was curious. So, as you built up kind of the gymnastics and the female representation spot with Hawker, and then Raymond representation was kind of building up there, and then as you mentioned, you kind of brought both sides together there. So I would assume that you get, or maybe not, a lot of, I guess, inquiries from specific athletes, maybe if it's gymnastics, women's basketball players, what have you. So how do you, I guess, source those inquiries? Is there a certain criteria? Do they have to have, certain maybe personality or, something going on for you guys to say, yeah, okay, let's work together? What does that look like?
Yeah. So right now it's actually very hard because as a person, I never want to turn away a student athlete because they're just so like impressed, like they, you want them to be steered in the right direction. You want to protect them at the end of the day, right? So my instinct is it's really hard to turn them away if your roster's too full and you can't handle, because you need to, be able to allocate yourself for your clients that are on roster. And so right now, the summer is my biggest recruiting time. We've probably locked down our roster. We have locked down our gymnastics roster for the year. But just other clients, people that really take NIL seriously. And I don't mean it in the way of like, because everyone should be taking their brand seriously. I mean it in just like, they actually care about what they're promoting. They're good in front of the camera. They have a really engaged audience. That's a no-brainer, right? Like that's someone we would take on as a client. But just athletes that do want agents, do your research. There's other ones out there. There's not one that's going to fit all. And especially at Raymond, we've now been able to, handpick exactly what you're looking for in a client.
Yeah. No, that's kind of just from the outside looking in, just following it for the past 6 months or so, maybe longer, just kind of the way that both, I guess, agencies have teamed up and worked with those types of athletes in that space, and finding the right fit, I think is crucial, especially when, looking for employees like yourself and, others to work at the firm. So that's been cool to see, is that's been built up going forward. So you mentioned this is the summer's kind of the recruiting time of the year. So I would assume you kind of have different phases of the year, recruiting, in season, that type of thing. So I guess as of now, what kind of, give the viewers maybe a taste of what your schedule looks like? As we mentioned before, it's kind of a 24/7, it's not a typical 9 to 5. So what does it look like? How do you structure it? It's kind of a typical maybe week in the life of Sydney.
Yeah. So I would say, so on top of like 24/7, no day is ever the same. That is like completely the case. So, setting up I like to set up as many calls as possible, like face to face, or I would ideally like it to be face to face, but get on a FaceTime, get on a Zoom call, just like constantly keep up with your relationships, because that's really important. When someone has a really good feeling about you, they want to keep working with you. And so that's always on the forefront of my mind, is to nurture my relationships that I have, also build new ones. There's so many people that are entering our world now. And it's really cool to hear about what they do, even if it's not exactly what you do and it can't help you in any way, just to have in your back pocket for whatever you might need. So building my, schedule to have a lot of phone calls with people, touch bases, as well as just like touch bases within our company, right? So everyone's working on their things all day long,
Right.
outreach, whatever it is. So, just try to get on a call with some of your colleagues that you haven't met before and, introduce, I mean, companies can be really big and also
Yeah.
really small, but, just constantly, communicating, but then, communicating with the athletes. So if they're on the Pacific time zone, you're on the call. If nighttime works for them, like you
Yeah.
have to drop your stuff and that's your schedule for the night.
Right.
And so it's very fluid. Nothing's super structured. For me, I like to do a lot like outreach probably for 2 to 3 hours a day. There's so many brands out there right now.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of, and it's crazy because a year ago, I'm not a year ago, 2 years ago, you had to explain what NIL was and like
Mhm.
businesses wanted no part of it. And now it's like common, not like common lingo.
Yep.
Everyone wants in on the space. And so, if you catch the right brand at the right time, like they're launching a campaign, boom, here's some athletes. Like, let me know what you think.
Yeah. Perfect fit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's kind of something I was interested in, is to get your thought as an expert in the space. Working here for a few years now, is where do you see kind of the NIL industry going? I know there's people that have some beef with NIL industry. It's pretty much just athlete marketing. So where do you see the athlete marketing industry in the college sector specifically? Where do you see that in the next 3 to 5 years? Do you see any? And I know there's some legislation talks, different things like that. Where do you see that going?
Yeah, I think that it's all gonna depend. I mean, that's another thing about this space is that the drop of a hat, the legislation changes, and that's what
Yep.
we see everywhere. No state is the same, no school is the same, no like team could be. They just set their own rules, and
Yep.
you need. I think a uniform legislation will be really is in the future, obviously. Like
Mhm.
we've seen that. What it is going to be, we don't know, but I think Title IX is going to have a play. I think women and male athletes, especially with the collectives, it's going to a lot where it's not. So equal opportunity for both athletes when it comes to the collectives and what they're bringing in and the resources they have.
Mhm.
The other thing too I see is, for international student athletes to have the same um, abilities as
Mhm.
an American here, but also like and not affect their visa.
Right.
Um, and so I think that that's going to be one of the major changes we see as well. So, and I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially for the international students, they couldn't do anything. I mean, they were getting locked down, and
I had
yeah, it
someone,
was
I had,
wild.
oh my gosh, I had someone who was on her, was on a team. I'm not going to give a name. She was on a team and all the athletes on the team got like a really designer, like luxury
Mm.
um thing, like item. And, you know, they just kind of pulled three of them that were not from the US like aside and were like, yeah, you can't have it.
We
Which is
had the same
sad.
sort of thing in our master's program. One of our kind of friends and fellow students is a really good swimmer. I won't name names again, but swims for his national team and everything. And we'd talk about NIL stuff in class, and he's just like, "Yeah, I can't do anything with it," which I thought was crazy.
Knife to my heart. I know. Yeah, it was definitely like a oversight.
Yeah,
Right.
that does. Yeah,
I
it doesn't
had
make any
kind of
sense.
another question for you related to the future. We've kind of discussed how NIL's evolved. I kind of, loaded question, answer it however you want. Um, but if you could see yourself, 5, 10 years down the road, however long you want to choose, where ideally do you want to be? Do you want to stay on the agency side? Kind of if you could picture a perfect life 10 years from now in your career, where would that be? And I know that's loaded, so answer it however you want.
Yeah, I definitely will be in sports for the rest of time in my life. And I see, honestly, I can't imagine doing anything else because I absolutely love every single day that I get to work with the athletes. Um, just this whole entire like tunnel that we're in of NIL is so fun, and you're over here, you're over there, you're doing everything, and I like that. I like not like sitting there and looking at, I mean, lawyers have to do this, and our GC has to do this, but like looking at contracts all day, like, no, thank you. And so, just like spicing it up and always having, multiple projects and multiple athletes, I think is really fun and stimulating for me. So
Yep, agreed there. And I think that's we can all agree on that. And those listening here is the sports industry is good at that, right? There's no days the same. It's a lot of, you could work for a professional team. I've said this before, but you're doing so many other different things where it's just such a vast array of opportunities in the sports industry. So that's one thing that the sports industry has going for itself. So that's been great to see. And then as we wrap up here, Sydney, for the listeners and viewers out there, you are a part, or maybe you are interested in a group called A Seat at the Table, and maybe if you can name some other, I guess, groups, or, I mean, I know Raymond Representation has a newsletter, but other sources of, I guess, content or things that you stay up to date for that you like, that you enjoy, that you can maybe share with the listeners and viewers.
absolutely. I can thank my Lisa Delpy and GW, my program, for, putting me on all these subscriptions.
Mm-hmm.
So D1 Ticker, that's probably the biggest one that I get updates for almost probably every day, for college news.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Business of College Sports, and The Gist is a really good newsletter as well that I'm subscribed to. And so just kind of everything. I mean, you can't have too much information, I think. So, go on Twitter, finding different deals. I think it's For You page now, pretty
Mm-hmm.
much. You're just seeing, you're not even following things, but you're seeing different NIL deals that are going on. So, I really like the D1 Ticker, though. That's an email subscription is good.
Perfect. Yeah, well, shout out to D1 Ticker, as well as to Dr. Lisa Delpy Narati there. We had her on the podcast. I don't know, it was like episode 3. Yeah, that was she was one of the first people. So she was awesome. So shout out to her and what she's doing over there. So we just want to wrap up here, Sydney. Thanks for joining us today, and a lot of insightful thoughts and comments. And we just like to give our viewer or our podcast guests the floor for the last few minutes or so. So you can plug anything, give any shout outs, any big news or things for the listeners and viewers to keep an eye out on. So the floor is yours.
Sure. So if you are interested in the NIL space, I would definitely say you can connect with me. I don't mind getting on a phone call here and there. Obviously, schedules are busy, but just to connect and tell you about what I do, but also learn about what you do and what you're interested in, to maybe connect with my network. I think your network can never be big enough. You can always make it more. So continue making connections and following up, and asking the right questions to people that are in the space. And then what else I would say is that if you are an intern, and if you are applying for internships, make sure your resume is really catered to the role that you want. Off the top of my head, if you're a social media person or applying for a social media position, talk about your experience with all the different platforms. It's really important. Same thing with other positions that are out there. And then I would just say that you get out in this industry, in the agency industry, you get out what you put in, and it's not just going to happen on its own. You have to make it happen. So really take the time to get to know your athletes, really take the time to get to know what the brand's about as well, so it lends to a clean partnership that is ongoing forever. So
perfect, wise words there, and I love it. You got to make it happen. So thanks again, Sydney, for joining us today, and to my great co-host, Callan Coleman, and thanks to the listeners and viewers. This has been another episode of the Constant Sports Podcast, and you can find these episodes on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. We release every Monday with great guests. As Sydney, this podcast is I think a great resource for those in the industry to connect with other sports professionals, stay up to date with things in that I guess realm and sector. So thanks again for joining us today, Sydney, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you both so much.